unfortunately, sometimes, regrettably, we witness currently these days.
You mentioned cyber attacks and deny any involvement by Russia. But, Mr. President, there is now a weight of evidence, a long list of alleged state-sponsored cyber attacks. Let me give you 5. There's a lot, but it makes a point. The US intelligence community says Russia interfered with the 2016 election. Election security officials said Russia tried to interfere with the 2020 election. Cybersecurity researchers said government hackers targeted COVID vaccine researchers, hacking for COVID vaccines. In April, the Treasury Department said the SolarWinds attack was the world's worst, with targets including 9 federal agencies. And just before your summit, Microsoft says it's discovered another attack with targets including organizations that have criticized you, Mr. Putin. Mr. President, are you waging a cyber war against America?
Дорогой Кир, вы сказали, что
Dear Kir, you have said that there is a weight of evidence of cyber attacks by Russia. And then you went on to list those official U.S. agencies that have stated as much. Is that what you did?
Well, I'm giving you information about who said it, so you can answer.
Right. Right. You are conveying information to me as to who said that, but where is evidence that this was indeed done? I will tell you that this person has said that and that person has said this, but where is the evidence? Where is proof? When there are charges like that without evidence, I can tell you, you can take your complaint to the International League of Sexual Reform. Will you be happy about it? This is a conversation that has no subject whatsoever. At least put something on the table so that we can look and respond. But there isn't anything like that. The latest thing, as far as I know, one of the latest attacks, was against a pipeline system in the U.S. Right, yes. So, what?
But this is, you'll mention...
Just a moment. As far as I know, the shareholders of this company even made a decision to pay the ransom. They paid off the cyber gangsters. If you have listed an entire set of U.S. special services, powerful, respectable, global, after all, they can find whoever the ransom was paid to. And once they do that, I hope they will realize that Russia has nothing to do with it. Now, there's some kind of a cyber attack against a meat processing plant. Next time, they will say there was an attack against some Easter eggs. It's becoming farcical, like an ongoing farcical thing, a never-ending farcical thing. You said plenty of evidence, but you haven't cited any proof, yet again. But this is an empty conversation, a pointless conversation. What exactly are we talking about?
You've moved on to this question of ransomware and criminals. Russian-speaking criminals, is the allegation, are targeting the American way of life: food, gas, water, hospitals, transport. Why would you let Russian-speaking criminals disrupt your diplomacy? Don't you want to know who's responsible?
You know, the simplest thing to do would be for us to sit down calmly and agree on joint work in cyberspace. And we did suggest that to Mr. Obama's administration. We started in September, during his last year in office. In October at first. They didn't say anything. Then in November they came back to us and said that yes, it was interesting. Then the election was lost. We restated this proposal to Mr. Trump's administration. The response was that it is interesting, but it didn't come to the point of actual negotiations. There are grounds to believe that we can build an effort in this area with the new administration. We hope that the domestic political situation in the United States will not prevent this from happening. But we have proposed to do this work together. Let's agree on the principles of mutual work. Let's find out what we can do together. Let's agree on how we will structure counter-efforts against this process that is gaining momentum. We here in the Russian Federation have cybercrime that has increased many times over in the last few years. We're trying to respond to it. We're looking for cybercriminals. If we find them, we punish them. We are willing to engage with international participants, including the United States. You are the ones who have refused to engage in joint work. What can we do? We cannot build this work. We cannot structure this work unilaterally.
Well, I'm not the government, Mr. Putin. I'm just a journalist asking questions. But if you clearly want to negotiate, you must have something to negotiate with. You don't ask for a truce unless you're fighting in a war.
You know, as far as the war, NATO, officially, I'd like to draw your attention to that. NATO has officially stated that it considers cyberspace a battlefield, an area of military action, and conducts military exercises in that battlefield.
And you're involved in that battlefield. Russia is fighting on that battlefield, correct?
No.
Really?
That is not correct. Really? If we wanted to do that, NATO did say that it considers cyberspace an area of combat, and it prepares and even conducts exercises. What stops us from doing the same? If you do that, we will do the same thing, but we don't want that. Just like we don't want space militarized, in the same manner, we don't want cyberspace militarized. And we have suggested on many occasions agreeing on mutual work in this cybersecurity area. But your government refuses to.
I saw your proposal from September, from just in September. Isn't what you're proposing that if you can come to an agreement over hacking and election interference, then you'll call off the hacking and the election interference if America agrees not to comment on your elections and your political opponents?
What we count on is that nobody should interfere in domestic processes in other countries, neither the U.S. in ours or we in the USA's or any other nations. All nations of the world should be given a chance to develop calmly. Even if there are crisis situations, they have to be resolved by the people domestically, without any influence or interference from the outside. But I don't think that this call by the U.S. administration is worth anything. It appears to me that the U.S. government will continue to interfere in political processes in other countries. I don't think that this process can be stopped, because it has gained a lot of momentum. However, as far as joint work in cyberspace to prevent some unacceptable actions on the part of cyber criminals, that definitely is something that can indeed be agreed upon. And it is our great hope that we will be able to establish this process with our U.S. partners.
If you were in America, what would you fear might happen next? The lights being switched off the way they were in Western Ukraine in 2015?
I don't understand. You mean if I were in America? What would I be afraid of if I were an American, or what?
What should Americans worry? What might happen next if there's no agreement on cyber?
You know, this is the same as space militarization. This is a very dangerous area. At some point in the past, in order to achieve something in the nuclear area, in terms of confrontation in the area of nuclear weapons, the USSR and the United States did agree to contain this particular arms race. Cyberspace is a very sensitive area. As of today, a great deal of human endeavors rely upon digital technologies, including the functioning of government. And of course, interference in these processes can cause a lot of damage and a lot of losses. And everybody understands that. And I'm repeating for the third time, let's sit down together and agree on joint work on how to achieve security in this area. That is all. What is bad about it? I don't even understand. I'm not asking you. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But for me, as an ordinary citizen, it would not be clear and understandable. Why is it that your government refuses to do it? Accusations keep coming, including up to interference and involvement in a cyber attack against some kind of a meat processing plant. But in the meantime, our proposal to start negotiations in this area are being turned down. This is some kind of nonsense, but that's exactly what's been happening. I repeat one more time. It is my hope that we will be able to start engaging in positive work in this area. In terms of what's to be afraid of, why is it that we suggest agreeing on something? Because what people can be afraid of in America, the very same thing can be a danger to us. U.S. is a high-tech country. NATO has declared cyberspace an area of combat. That means they are planning something. They are preparing something. So obviously, this cannot but worry us.
Do you fear that American intelligence is deep inside Russian systems and has the ability to do you a lot of damage in cyber?
I'm not afraid, but I bear in mind that it is a possibility.
Let me ask you about human rights, an issue that President Biden will raise. Mr. President, he'll raise the issue of Alexei Navalny, targeted for assassination, now in a Russian jail. Mr. President, why are you so threatened by opposition?
Who says that I feel threatened by opposition, or we're threatened by opposition? Who told you? Who told you that?
Well, a Russian court has just... excuse me, I'm sorry. A Russian court has just outlawed organizations connected to Mr. Navalny. Literally every non-systematic opposition figure is facing criminal charges. In journalism, Medusa and V-Times have been hit with foreign agent labels and face collapse. Mr. President, it's as if dissent is simply not tolerated in Russia anymore.
Well, you are presenting it as dissent and intolerance towards dissent in Russia. We view it completely differently. You have mentioned the law on foreign agents, but that's not something that we invented. That law was adopted back in the 1930s in the United States, the law on foreign agents. And that law is much harsher than ours, and it is intended, among other things, at preventing interference in the domestic political affairs of the United States. And on the whole, I believe it is justified.
Mr. President,
do you want me to answer? Would you like me to answer? Would you
in
like
America,
me to keep answering?
We call what you're doing now whataboutism. What about this? What about that? It's a way of not answering the question. Let me ask you a direct question. Did you?
I will look.
Let me ask.
I will look. No. Let me answer. You've asked me a question. You're not liking my answer, so you're interrupting me right away. This is inappropriate. So there we go. In the United States, this law was adopted a long time ago. It's working, and sanctions under that law are much harsher than here, up and including imprisonment. Yes, correct. Again, you're not letting me, but I will revert to us. Do not worry, I will go back to us. I will not remain focused on U.S. problems. exclusively. I will reverse and go back and comment on what's happening here.
Your belief was that nations shouldn't intervene in other countries' domestic affairs.
Correct.
Shouldn't comment on other countries' politics. But there you are doing it again.
No. No. If you muster some patience and let me finish saying what I mean to say, everything will be clear to you. But you are not liking my answer. You don't want my answer to be heard by your audience. That is the problem. You're shutting me down. Is that free expression, or is that free expression the American way?
Please answer.
So, thank you very much. Here we go. The U.S. adopted this law. We passed this law only very recently in order to protect our society against outside interference. In some of the states in the U.S., if a foreign observer approaches a polling station, the prosecutor says, "Come a few feet closer and you'll go to jail." Is that normal? Is that democracy in the modern world? But that is an actual practice in some of the states. We don't have anything like that. When I talk about these laws, about non-interference or attempts at interference, what do I mean as applied to Russia? Many entities of the so-called civil society, the reason I say so-called is because many of those entities are funded from abroad. Specific relevant action programs are prepared. Their core members are trained abroad. And when our official authorities see that, then in order to prevent this kind of interference in our domestic affairs, we make relevant decisions and adopt relevant laws. And they're more lenient than yours. We have a saying, "Don't be mad at the mirror if you're ugly." It has nothing to do with you personally. But if somebody blames us for something, what I say is, why don't you look at yourselves? You will see yourselves in the mirror, not us. There is nothing unusual about it. As far as political activities and the political system, it is evolving. We have 44 registered parties, well, 34 I think, and 32 are about to participate in various electoral processes across the entire country in September.
Yes. We only have a limited amount of time, Mr. President.
There is also non-systemic opposition. You have said that some people have been detained, some people are in prison. Yes, that is all true. You mentioned certain names. Yes, I will talk about it. I will not leave any of your questions unattended.
Can I ask you, can I just ask you a direct question? Did you order Alexei Navalny's assassination?
Of course not. We don't have this kind of habit of assassinating anybody. That's one. Number two is, I want to ask you, did you order the assassination of the woman who walked into the Congress and who was shot and killed by a policeman? Do you know that 450 individuals were arrested after entering the Congress, and they didn't go there to steal a laptop. They came with political demands. 450 people have been detained.
You're talking about the capital.
They're looking at jail time between 15 and 25 years. And they came to the Congress with political demands. Isn't that persecution for political opinions? Some have been accused of plotting to take over government power. Some are accused of robbery. They didn't go there to rob. The people, the individuals whom you mentioned, yes, they were convicted for violating their status of individuals who had been previously convicted and given suspended sentences. Twice an individual was given suspended sentences. Essentially, it was a warning not to violate the Russian laws. And he completely ignored the requirements of the law. The court went on and turned the conviction into real jail time. Thousands and thousands of people ignore requirements of the law, and they have nothing to do with political activities in Russia every year, and they go to jail. If somebody is actually using political activities as a shield to deal with their own issues, including to achieve their commercial goals, then it's something that they have to be held responsible for.
There you go again, Mr. President. What about America when I've asked you about Russia? Let me ask you, you mentioned Congress. Let me ask you another direct question that you can answer, and it's an allegation that has been made, an accusation that has been made again and again now in the United States. The late John McCain in Congress called you a killer. When President Trump was told that you are a killer, he didn't deny it. When President Biden was asked whether he believes you are a killer, he said, I do. Mr. President, are you a killer?
Look, over my tenure, I've gotten used to attacks from all kinds of angles, and from all kinds of directions, under all kinds of pretexts and reasons, and of different caliber and fierceness. And none of it surprises me. People with whom I work and with whom I argue on the international arena, we're not bride and groom. We don't swear everlasting love and friendship. We are partners, and in some areas, we are rivals. As far as harsh rhetoric, I think that this is an expression of overall U.S. culture. Of course, in Hollywood, because we did mention Hollywood at the beginning of our conversation, there are some deep things that undoubtedly can be referred to as works of cinematic art. But more often than not, it's macho behavior, and that is also part of U.S. culture, including political culture, and it is considered normal. By the way, not here. It is not considered normal here. If this rhetoric is followed by a suggestion to meet and discuss bilateral issues and matters of international policies, I see it as desire to engage in joint work. If this desire is serious, we are prepared to support it.
I don't think I heard you answer the question, the direct question, Mr. President.
I did answer. I did. I will add, if you let me. I have heard dozens of such accusations, especially during the period of some grave events during our counter-terrorism efforts in North Caucasus. And when it happens, I'm always guided by the interests of the Russian people and the Russian state. And sentiments in terms of who calls somebody what kind of labels, this is not something I worry about in the least.
Let me give you some names. Anna Politkovskaya, shot dead. Alexander Litvinenko, poisoned by polonium. Sergei Magnitsky, allegedly beaten and died in prison. Boris Nemtsov, shot moments from the Kremlin, moments from here. Mikhail Lesin died of blunt trauma in Washington, D.C. Are all of these a coincidence, Mr. President?
Look, you know, I don't want to come across as being rude, but this looks like some kind of indigestion, except that it's verbal indigestion. You mentioned many individuals who indeed suffered and perished at different points in time for various reasons at the hand of different individuals. You've mentioned Lesin. Lesin used to work in my administration. I liked him very much. He perished in the United States, died or perished. I'm not sure which. We should ask you how exactly he perished. I regret to this day that he is not with us anymore. In my opinion, he's a very decent individual. As far as the others, we found some of the criminals who committed those crimes, and some are in prison. And we are prepared to continue to work in this mode and along this avenue, identifying everybody who violates the law and by their actions cause damage, including to the image of the Russian Federation. However, just piling everything together is meaningless, inappropriate, and baseless. If one sees this as a line of attack, then very well. Let me listen to it one more time, but I repeat, I have heard it many times, but this doesn't baffle me. I know which direction to move in order to secure the interests of the Russian state.
Let's move on to Belarus and Ukraine, two issues that will certainly come up in your summit with President Biden. Did you have prior knowledge that a commercial airliner would be forced to land in Belarus and that a journalist would be arrested?
No, I did not know about this. I didn't know about any airliner. I didn't know about the individuals who were detained there subsequently. I found out about it from the media. I didn't know. I didn't have a clue about any detainees. I don't know. It is of no interest to us.
You appeared to approve of it, judging by your meeting with President Lukashenko soon afterwards.
Not that I approve of it, not that I condemn it, but, well, it happened. I said recently in one of my conversations with a European colleague, I told him about the version of Mr. Lukashenko who told me about it. He said that information had been given to them, that there was an explosive device on board the plane. They informed the pilot without forcing the pilot to land, and the pilot made a decision to land in Minsk. That is all.
And you believe that?
Why should I not believe him? Ask the pilot. It's the simplest thing. Ask the chief pilot. Ask the commander of the aircraft. Did you ask him if he was forced to land? Because I have not heard or seen an interview with the aircraft commander that landed in Minsk. Why not ask him? Why not ask him if he was forced to land? Why don't you ask him? It's actually even odd. Everybody accuses Lukashenko, but the pilot hasn't been asked. You know, I cannot but recall another similar situation where the plane of the president of Bolivia was forced to land in Vienna at the orders of the U.S. administration. Air Force One, presidential plane, was forced to land. The president was led out of the aircraft. They searched the plane, and you don't even recall that. Do you think it was normal? So that was good, but what Lukashenko did was bad? Look, let us speak the same language, and let us use the same concepts. If, well, Lukashenko is a gangster, how about the other incident then? Was it good? In Bolivia at the time, it was seen as humiliation of the entire country. But everybody kept mum in order to not aggravate the situation. Nobody's recalling that. By the way, you're not the only situation of this kind.
With respect, you're recalling it, but
so if it is Lukashenko, that means you gave him an example to follow.
We are talking about a commercial flight. Shouldn't people be able to take a commercial flight across Europe without fear of being shot down, like in the case of MH17, or forced down so that a dictator can arrest a journalist?
Yes. Look, I will tell you one more time. What President Lukashenko told me, I don't have any reason not to believe him. For the third time, I'm telling you, ask the pilot. Why don't you ask the pilot? Was he being scared? Was he being forced? The fact that information appeared that there was a bomb on the plane, that individuals, people had nothing to do with politics or any kind of domestic conflicts, that they could perceive it negatively, could worry about it. Of course that's a bad thing. There is nothing good about this. And obviously we condemn everything that has to do with this, and international terrorism and the use of aircraft and so on. Of course we're against this. And you told me that the landing of the aircraft of the president of Bolivia is a completely different matter. Yes, it is different, except that it is 10 times worse than what was done, if anything was done, in Belarus. But you just won't acknowledge it. You are ignoring it. And you want millions of people around the world to either not notice it or forget about it tomorrow. You won't get away with it. It won't happen.
In the case of neighbouring Ukraine, earlier this year, the European Union said you had more than 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border. Was that an attempt to get Washington's attention?
Послушайте.
Look,
Во-первых, мы проводили,
first,
во-первых, сама Украина
Ukraine itself
постоянно
constantly,
втаскивала,
and I think is still doing that, it kept bringing personnel and military equipment to the conflict area in the southeast of Ukraine, Donbass. That's one. Two is that we conducted exercises in our territory, and not just in the south of the Russian Federation, but also in the Far East and in the north and in the Arctic. Simultaneously, military exercises were being held in different parts of the Russian Federation. At the very same time, the U.S. was conducting military exercises in Alaska. Do you know anything about it? Probably not. But I'll tell you that I do know. And that is in direct proximity to our borders. But that's in your territory, on your land. We didn't even pay attention to it. What is happening now? Now, at our southern borders, there is a war game, Defender Europe. 40,000 personnel, 15,000 units of military equipment. Part of them have been airlifted from the U.S. continent directly to our borders. Did we airlift any of our military technology to the U.S. borders? No, we did not.
Many of those,
why are you worried?
Many of those exercises are a response to your actions, Mr. President. Do you worry that your opposition to NATO has actually strengthened it? For 6 years, NATO has spent more on defence.
That's some defense. Some defense. During the USSR era, Gorbachev, who is still, thank God, with us, you can ask him, got a promise, a verbal promise. However, it was a promise that there would be NATO expansion to the east. Where are those promises? 2 waves of expansion.
Where is that written down? Where is that promise written down?
Да-да-да. Вы молодец.
Right. Well done. Well done. Correct. You've got a point. Nya. Got you good. Well, congratulations. Of course, everything should be sealed and written on paper. But what was the point of expanding NATO to the east and bringing this infrastructure to our borders? And all of this before saying that we're the ones who have been acting aggressively? Why? On what basis? Did Russia, after the USSR collapsed, present any threat to the United States or European countries? We voluntarily withdrew our troops from Eastern Europe, leaving them just on empty land. Our people there, military personnel, lived there for decades in what was not normal conditions, including their children. We went to tremendous expenses. And what did we get in response? We got in response infrastructure next to our borders. And now you're saying that we're threatening to somebody. We're conducting war games on a regular basis, including sometimes surprise military exercises. Why should it worry the NATO partners? I just don't understand this.
Will you commit now not to send any further Russian troops into Ukrainian sovereign territory?
Look, did we say that we were planning to send our armed formations anywhere? We conducted war games in our territory. How can this not be clear? I'm saying it again because I want your audience to hear it. I want your listeners to hear it, both on the screens of their television sets and on the internet. We conducted military exercises in our territory. Imagine if we sent our troops into direct proximity to your borders. What would have been your response? We didn't do that. We did it in our territory. You conducted war games in Alaska. God bless you. But you had crossed an ocean, brought thousands of personnel and thousands of units of military equipment close to our borders, and yet you believe that we're acting aggressively, and somehow you're not. Just look at that. Pot calling the kettle black.
Moving on, the Biden administration has said that at your summit they will bring up the case of 2 U.S. prisoners in Russia, Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed. They are 2 former Marines. Trevor Reed is suffering from COVID in prison. Why don't you release them ahead of the summit? Wouldn't that show goodwill?
I know that we have certain U.S. citizens who are in prison have been convicted, but if one considers the number of Russian Federation citizens who are in U.S. prisons, then these numbers don't even compare. The United States, in recent years, has made a habit of catching Russian Federation citizens in third countries and taking them in violation of all international legal norms and put them in prison.
Unless we can have more time, I'm very happy to keep going for another 30 minutes.
I control the time here, so don't worry about time. Your guy, the Marine, he's just a drunk and a troublemaker. As they say here, he got himself shit-faced on vodka and started a fight. Among other things, he hit a cop. It's nothing. It's just a common crime. There's nothing to it. As far as possible negotiations on this subject, sure, it can be talked about. Obviously, we'll raise the matter of our citizens in prison in the United States. Yes, it can be a specific conversation, sure. We're happy to do it, although it doesn't seem that the U.S. administration has raised that matter, but we're prepared to talk about that. Our pilot Yaroshenko has been in prison in the U.S. for a good, I don't know how many years, 15, maybe 20 years. And there, the problem also seems to be a common crime. We could and should talk about it, but we haven't been talking about this, but we could. If the U.S. side is prepared to discuss it, so are we.
So his family will find that incredibly distressing to hear you talk about him that way. It does sound, though, as if you would consider some kind of a prisoner swap.
There is nothing offensive about it. He got drunk on vodka and started a fight. He fought a cop. There is nothing offensive about it. These things happen in life. There is nothing horrible about it. It happens to our men as well. Somebody gulps down some vodka and starts a fight. So you violate the law, you go to prison. What would have happened if you'd fought a cop in your country? He would have been shot dead on the spot, and that's the end of it. Isn't that the case?
And on the prisoner swap question, is that something that you would consider? Are you looking to negotiate? You're meeting with the president.
Yes, of course. Even better would be a discussion of the possibility of entering into an agreement on extradition of individuals who are in prison. This is a standard international practice. We have such agreements with several countries. We are prepared to enter into such an agreement with the United States.
And just to be clear, so we hear it from you, which Russian prisoners in the US would you be hoping to bring back to Russia? By name.
Well, we have a whole list. I've just mentioned our pilot, a pilot named Yaroshenko, who was taken to the U.S. from a third country and was given a rather lengthy sentence. He has some serious health issues, but the prison administration is not paying attention to this. You have mentioned that your citizen has coronavirus, but nobody's paying attention to the health issues of our citizen. We are prepared to discuss these issues. Moreover, it makes sense, as you correctly said, and I completely agree with you, there are matters of humanitarian nature, and why not discuss them as long as they pertain to the health and life of specific individuals and of their families, of course. Sure thing.
Just quickly, before I move on the subject of prisons, again with Alexei Navalny, will you commit that you will personally ensure that Alexei Navalny will leave prison alive?
Look, such decisions in this country are not made by the president. They're made by the court, whether or not to set somebody free. As far as the health, all individuals who are in prison, that is something that the administration of the specific prison or penitentiary establishment is responsible for. And there are medical facilities in penitentiaries that are perhaps far from the best condition, and they're the ones whose responsibility it is, and I hope that they do it properly. But to be honest, I have not visited such places for a long time. I did visit one in St. Petersburg some time ago, And that was a very grave impression that was made on me by the medical facilities in a prison. But since then, I hope some things have been done to improve the situation. And I proceed from the premise that the person that you have mentioned, the same kind of measures will apply, not in any way worse than to anybody else who happens to be in prison. That can be said for sure.
His name is Alexei Navalny. People will note that you were
I don't
prepared
care.
to say
I don't
that
care.
he would leave prison alive.
Look, please listen to me carefully. His name can be anything. He's one of the individuals who are in prison. For me, he's one of the citizens of the Russian Federation who has been found guilty by a Russian court of law and is in prison. There are many citizens like that. By the way, our so-called prison population, the people who are in prison, in the last few years has been reduced by almost 50%, which I consider a big victory for us and a major sign of the fact that our legal system is becoming more humane. So he will not be treated any worse than anybody else. Nobody should be given any kind of special treatment. It would be wrong. Everybody should be in an equal situation. This is called the most favored nation treatment. Not worse than anyone else. And the individual that you have mentioned